The gravel road outside Miller's orchard had never seen a truck like it. Rust crawled up the wheel wells like ivy, the tailgate hung on one hinge, and the whole thing rattled so loudly that dogs 3 farms away started barking before it even arrived. Behind the wheel sat a 16-year-old girl named Sable Journey Whitlock. Everyone in town just called her Sable, with her dark hair pulled back under a faded cap and a notepad wedged between her knee and the door. She parked beside the packing shed, cut the engine, and walked up to old Gary Miller with the same question she'd asked at 4 other orchards that week. "Can I have your broken fruit crates?" Gary blinked at her. "The broken ones, Sable, those are headed for the burn pile." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm asking." He shrugged, waved a hand toward the stack behind the shed, and went back to sorting Honeycrisps. He didn't ask why. Nobody ever really asked why, not at first. A crate was worth nothing once the slats split or the corners caved in. Giving them away cost a farmer nothing but 10 minutes of loading time, and Sable always loaded them herself. By the end of that month, she'd visited 11 orchards, 3 vegetable farms, and the county co-op. Word started moving faster than she was. At the Saturday farmers market, a woman selling peaches leaned toward another vendor and said, just loud enough to carry, "That's the Whitlock girl. Collecting garbage now, I hear." Behind the old Whitlock barn, the pile grew. Not a pile, really piles, plural. Sable didn't just dump the crates in a heap the way anyone else would have. She sorted them. 1 row for crates with intact corner posts. 1 row for crates with rotted slats but sound frames. 1 row for crates too far gone for anything but their hardware, the nails, the wire mesh, the metal corner brackets she pried off one by one with a flathead screwdriver, her fingers wrapped in an old bandana against the splinters. She measured every single one. Height, width, slat spacing, wood thickness. She wrote the numbers into a green spiral notebook that never left her side, in handwriting so small her mother needed glasses to read it. "What exactly are you doing back there?" her mother, Diane, asked one evening, watching her daughter sketch something onto a torn piece of graph paper by flashlight, long after the porch light had been switched off. Sable didn't look up, figuring something out. "Figuring what out?" "I'll show you when it works." Diane wanted to press further, but there was something in her daughter's face. That same stubborn stillness she'd had since she was small. The look she got right before she solved a math problem nobody else in her class could crack, that told her to let it be. If stories of determination, family, and the quiet wisdom hidden in the most common places move you, subscribe and join us weekly. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to know how far this story has reached. Okay, let's continue. Not everyone was so patient. At school, a boy named Cody Prout made a habit of it. "Hey, crate girl," he'd call across the hallway, "found any good garbage lately?" His friends laughed every time, and every time Sable just kept walking, her notebook tucked under her arm like a shield. By late spring, the barn's back wall was stacked 8 feet high with sorted, labeled, numbered crates, nearly 600 of them. Neighbors driving past on Route 9 slowed down just to stare. Some shook their heads. Some laughed outright. One man, a retired mechanic named Walt Odom, pulled his truck onto the shoulder just to squint at the structure taking shape at the edge of the collection. It wasn't a shed. It wasn't a fence. It looked almost like the skeleton of something, long frames laid at careful angles, gaps left where something else was clearly meant to go, small stakes driven into the dirt in a grid pattern that made no obvious sense. Nobody knew what it was. Nobody, including, if they were honest, Sable herself, not entirely. Not yet. The man who finally asked the right question wasn't from town. Everett Kaminsky had spent 40 years as an agricultural engineer before retiring to a small property 2 miles past the county line, and he'd heard about the crate girl, the way most retirees heard about anything secondhand, at the diner, over eggs and bad coffee. He found her behind the barn on a Tuesday afternoon, kneeling in the dirt with a level pressed against a half-built frame. "That corner's off," he said. Sable didn't jump. She just glanced at the frame, then at him. "By how much?" "Half an inch, maybe more." He crouched down slowly, joints popping, and studied her setup, 3 courses of crates stacked and interlocked, a gap of open space running through the center. "You're not building a wall." "No. You're building something that needs to drain." She looked up at him properly for the first time. "How'd you know that?" "Because you left channels. Nobody leaves channels like that by accident." He tapped one of the gaps with a knuckle. "What's this for?" "Water," she admitted. "I don't want it pooling." Everett nodded slowly, like she'd just passed a test she didn't know she was taking. "Reclaimed wood rots fast if water sits on it. You knew that already, or you got lucky." "I read about it at the library, and the extension office had a pamphlet." "Pamphlets'll get you started." He straightened up, wincing. "They won't get you finished." He didn't offer to fix her frame. He didn't tell her what to build. Instead, over the following weeks, he showed up every few days with a thermos of coffee and a habit of asking questions instead of giving answers. "Why'd you pick fir crates over the pine ones for the base?" "Fir's denser, won't soak up as much water." "Good. Now, what happens to wood in full sun with no airflow behind it?" She thought about it. "It sweats, traps moisture, rots from the inside." "Right so. So I need gaps, airflow between layers." "Now you're getting somewhere." He taught her about moisture without ever writing a formula on a chalkboard. He taught her about structural load by having her stack bricks on a scrap frame until it groaned, then asking her to explain why. He taught her about drainage by handing her a hose and telling her to just watch where the water went. Passive irrigation, modular construction, the basics of a circular economy, where farm waste became farm material, became farm value again. All of it arrived through conversation, through mistakes, through Everett's favorite phrase. "Don't tell me. Show me you figured it out." "You ever think about what you're actually trying to build here?" he asked one afternoon, watching her sketch yet another revision into the green notebook. "I have an idea," Sable said carefully. "I don't want to say it yet, in case it doesn't work." Everett almost smiled. "Fair enough." By midsummer, the frame behind the barn had grown into something with real shape, 3 tiers, connecting channels, a strange lattice of crate walls rising nearly 7 feet into the air. Diane started bringing sandwiches out instead of asking questions. Even Gary Miller drove by once, slowed his truck, and just stared for a long moment before continuing on without a word. Sable had never worked so hard on anything in her life, and she had no idea that the hardest part hadn't even started yet. The storm came in early August, the kind that rolled in fast off the ridge with no warning beyond a sudden green tint to the sky. Sable and Everett had reinforced the top tier only 2 days before. They hadn't reinforced the base. She woke to her mother's voice calling her name from the porch, panic sharpening every syllable. By the time Sable reached the barn, barefoot, rain soaking through her shirt, the structure was already leaning. She watched, helpless, frozen, as the bottom tier gave way first, the waterlogged wood splitting under the weight above it. The middle tier followed a second later, crates crashing down in a splintering avalanche, soil and seedlings and months of careful labor spilling across the mud. She stood there a long time after the rain stopped, long enough that Everett found her still standing in the wreckage, arms wrapped around herself, saying nothing. "I don't understand," she said finally, voice cracking in a way it hadn't since she was a little girl. "I measured everything. I checked the drainage. I did everything you told me." "You did," Everett agreed quietly. "Then why did it fail?" He crouched down and picked up a piece of the shattered base, soft, dark, saturated clear through. "Because the wood at the bottom carried more weight than any wood should, and it sat in standing water for 2 months before you ever noticed the grade of the ground was wrong. Not the crates, Sable. The ground. She didn't answer. She just stared at the ruin, 6 months of collecting, sorting, learning, building, reduced to a pile of broken slats and drowned seedlings in the mud. That night, for the first time, she didn't write in the green notebook. She left it closed on her nightstand and lay awake, listening to the last of the rain drip off the barn roof, wondering if Cody Prout had been right all along. Maybe it had just been garbage. Her mother found her the next morning sitting on the porch steps, staring out at nothing. "You don't have to keep going," Diane said gently, sitting down beside her. "Nobody would blame you." Sable was quiet for a long moment. Then she stood up, walked back into the house, and came out with the green notebook and a pencil. "I need to know the actual grade of that ground," she said, "before I do anything else." What she rebuilt over the following 2 months looked almost nothing like what had collapsed. She and Everett regraded the ground first, sloping it away from the barn instead of toward it. She rebuilt the base entirely from the densest fir crates in her collection, elevated on cinder blocks scavenged from the co-op scrap pile, with a full 6 inches of open air beneath every board. And slowly, piece by piece, tier by tier, the true shape of her project began to emerge. It wasn't a shed. It wasn't decoration. It was a greenhouse, built almost entirely from reclaimed fruit crates, with 3 growing tiers stacked in a spiral so that water draining from the top level fed the level below it, and the level below that before finally collecting in a rain barrel Everett had helped her plumb from an old cistern. Vertical growing towers lined the inner wall, built from crates too narrow for anything else. Small gaps along the outer frame let pollinators move freely between the shelves. Nothing about it was purchased new. Every board had once been thrown away. "It's a demonstration garden," she finally told her mother, standing inside it for the first time as autumn light filtered through the open lattice walls. "For the whole town, to show people what you can grow without wasting anything, without buying anything new." Diane didn't say anything for a long moment. She just walked slowly along the spiral tiers, touching the leaves of the seedlings that were, this time, thriving. "You built this from crates that would have been burned," she finally said. "Everyone was going to burn them," Sable said. "I just asked first." The neighbors came first, out of curiosity more than anything. Then the farmers came, walking the spiral tiers with the same slow, appraising look Everett had given her frame months earlier. Gary Miller stood in front of the passive irrigation system for a full 10 minutes before finally saying, "I didn't think this would actually hold water." Then the school came. Sable's old science teacher brought a class of 4th graders out on a Friday afternoon, and Sable, quiet, watchful Sable, who spoke maybe 6 words a day to most people, found herself explaining drainage and composting and pollinator habitats to 24 kids who hung on every word like she was telling them a secret. Then the county extension office called. Then a regional sustainable agriculture group. Then, 18 months after the storm that had nearly ended everything, a representative from the state's Small Farms Development Program drove 3 hours to see it for herself, and left with a folder full of photographs and a proposal for funding to help Sable build 2 more. By the second spring, orchards 2 counties over were calling to ask if Sable could visit and help them start their own reclaimed crate gardens. The same farmers who had once handed over broken crates without a second thought were now calling ahead to ask if she needed more before they'd even burned the pile. Cody Prout, of all people, showed up on a Saturday to help load a fresh batch of crates into her truck. He didn't apologize, not exactly. He just worked quietly beside her for 20 minutes before finally muttering, "Guess it wasn't garbage." Sable just nodded and kept loading. 2 years after that first pickup truck ride to Miller's orchard, the town gathered behind the Whitlock barn for what the local paper was calling the opening of the Sable Whitlock Community Growing Center. 3 full greenhouses now, built from an estimated 4,000 reclaimed fruit crates, feeding a rotating share of fresh produce to the county food bank every single week. Everett stood near the back of the crowd, arms crossed, wearing the same quiet, satisfied look he'd worn the day he first asked her about the drainage channels. Gary Miller found Sable near the entrance before the ribbon-cutting began. "You still collecting?" he asked. "Always," she said. He smiled and shook his head. "I've got another 200 broken crates behind the shed. Figured I'd ask before I burned them." Sable looked past him, out at the spiral greenhouses catching the late afternoon light. At the neighbors and farmers and schoolchildren filling the yard, where a pile of broken wood had once sat, while the whole town laughed. "Bring them by," she said. "There's always something to build." She didn't say it like it was extraordinary. She said it the way she'd said everything from the very beginning, quietly, plainly, like it had never once occurred to her that broken things were ever really broken at all. What farming lesson stayed with you from Claire's story? Drop it in the comments. We are interested on your feedback. Tell us where you're watching from. This community reaches further than you'd think. And if stories like this one matter to you, subscribe. Thank you.